So while we were just leveling on our Mendeln Infinimus build, Gamescom is currently happening, which is fantastic. I actually missed out on an opportunity to fly out to Gamescom, maybe next year. But while that's happening, we got a huge announcement for Season 2, the Season of Blood, for Diablo 4. And while this cinematic is absolutely beautiful and it's wonderful and I recommend watching it, I'll have the link to it down below. There were a couple things that were picked up during the Gamescom, and I'm not necessarily sure that it would be safe for me to share Gamescom footage. So I'm just going to tell you the notes that I pulled out from it. But luckily, Blizzard has also recently put out their news update on Season 2. So Season 2 isn't coming until October 17th. If you're looking for that information, you could just have it right there. October 17th, it shows right. Oh, and look at there. There's my boy Rax. But... and then GBA Smart. But there you go. So it's coming on the 17th, but let's go ahead and take a look at the news post because there's a lot of great little nuggets of information in there. And we're going to have to do a little bit of conjecture, a little bit of guesswork, because some of it leads me to believe that a lot of this content may be available in Eternal and not just in the season. So all player base, like the entirety of the player base, can rejoice. But let's go ahead and pop over to the news release of it and take a look at what they are currently quoting as new features and new content coming in the season. So here we go. We have the news post. It'll be linked down below as well, but it goes into what the season is about. So Season 2, the Season of Blood, is the concept that the vampires, the ones that are like most notably in the Fractured Peaks area, have a new lord, and it's this gentleman right here. And I've got to be honest with you, the big wide neck kind of makes it look like he's wearing a Halloween mask. Maybe we can take another stab at that one. But this is the new dark master of all of the vampires that are set them out in like a blood crazed hunt. And the concept is that the world is now beset by a massive outbreak of vampires. Not only that, they are also turning people into vampires along with them, not just thralls, but full-blooded vampires. And what they are pointing to is that to be able to fight this darkness, we have to become the darkness ourselves. You know, that pretty like niche, pretty cliche concept, but we're literally going to turn into vampires. On top of that, we're going to get cool vampire abilities. So here we're going to get that new quest line. It's ultimately to fight this new boss like we've been fighting Varshan in Season 1. And vampiric powers here to wield against their originators. Very interesting of how this could actually be implemented in the game. Are we going to get a new skill bar? Are our vampire powers going to augment certain skills that we have? So similar to the fact that the Malignant Hearts kind of changed how your build works on a fundamental level, these vampiric powers are probably also going to change how your build works on a fundamental level. And I'm wondering if it's a new augment to skills on top of aspects. Is it literally a secondary skill bar? Is it triggered abilities on your gear, some way, some form? It sounds like it's not going to be gear based though, because you are literally becoming the vampire. So I'm assuming either like an addition to the skill tree, maybe its own UI progression system of after a certain amount of time, unlocking more powers. I would love personally for it to kind of be its own skill tree, where you're going to augment the different abilities that you have, a lot of different lucky hit abilities. This is a great way to like cause certain builds to be more conscious of lucky hit. And then 5 additional endgame bosses. Now here's why I think that the endgame bosses are actually just going to be in the game in general. If we're looking at the first little insert here, the 5 endgame bosses, new and returning foes for additional endgame challenges. So obviously this is going to be one of our bosses. Theoretically, he's also one of the new endgame bosses, although, and here's a reason why he might not be part of this, is if you read a little bit later on, one of the things is that we are going to be able to better target farm for uniques and uber uniques. So if we read on a little bit about how they are incorporating this in some way into the season itself, the updates in the above bullet in the ability to target specific unique and ultra unique items as a drop will be available in both seasonal and eternal realms. Now, why is that interesting? Well, Varshan and the Malignant Tunnels aren't available in the Eternal Realm currently. If this is our new endgame boss for Season 2, it would be interesting if he was now one of the endgame bosses that you could target farm these uber uniques off of and the base uniques off of, and somehow, you know, transcend this difference between seasonal and eternal. It doesn't necessarily really matter how they implement it, but the concept is that there are 5 endgame bosses that include new and returning. So if we think about returning foes that have existed in the game that aren't currently being used, the first ones that spring to mind for me are Endariel and Duriel, 2 bosses that one has like a whole quest line for. Duriel, who doesn't really have anything, he just kind of shows up, kills you, you kill him, and then you just kind of move on. Those are the big bosses that I think of when I think of returning bosses. But I'm really excited for what this means because obviously this game is seriously lacking endgame, right? That's what the majority of the complaints about it are right now. 5 endgame bosses, if we could do like a boss rush for them, or if they're in different parts of the world in their own kind of capstone dungeons, I think there's a lot of way that they could implement this. And the fact that we're able to target farm uber uniques hails back to when Joe Papora said that they are looking to increase the drop rates of the Uber Uniques, although when he was talking about it, he said a small increase in them and not necessarily incredibly easy way of getting them, but being able to target farm them sounds like a fairly large increase if they expect people to legitimately get these drops. So all in all, I'm just generally excited for what that content could possibly be and whether or not we're going to be seeing this guy in the internal realm as well. And then the two parts on the right side talk about how Renown rewards are going to be further altered in the season 2. So in season 1, if you at least had found your altars of Lilith and fully explored the map, you unlocked all of that for your characters forever. Basically, the feedback has been people don't like the Renown grind. And while I personally disagree with that, I like having a checklist of stuff to go do because I'm here to like get my dopamine fix. I know that not everybody shares that opinion, but it looks like it's literally just if you've done the Renown, you're going to get the Renown. So if you can't see it behind my big head, this is going to include your potion charges, your skill points, your obol cap upgrades, and your paragon points. So it sounds like if you do your Renown, at least right now, it's just unlocked forever. You're never going to have to worry about it. You're just going to, when you start a new character in season 2, open up your Renown tracker, click all of your claim rewards, and then move on with your day. Now, the next card are personally my most important things that they could possibly be doing in the game other than adding more endgame content. And it's like pretty drastic overhauls to some key systems in the game right now that people have been asking for. And when we first got word of when they were going to happen, people thought season 2 would never come. But at the very least right now, we have this. This is their claim of what they're going to do. So first, they're going to be updating the elemental resistance system. This is something that Joe Shelley had said multiple times, like, yes, we understand resistances are underpowered based off of how we've implemented them in the game, and that we want to reevaluate that system and make like solid changes across the board as opposed to just bumping up numbers. So without having the specifics of what is going to happen, elemental resistances are in some way going to get overhauled. Now, I personally have been experiencing like a lot of deaths at the hands of just elemental abilities, right? Lightning enchanted, shock lance, fire enchanted, cold enchanted. These things just do ridiculous amounts of damage. And this is because we have a resistance system that really caps out realistically around somewhere in like the 25 damage reduction range, like regardless of how you invest in it. So I am hopeful that the base amount of experience that we already invest into our characters are now just going to get us more bang for our buck, and maybe specific resistance rolls on gear, like the boot slot could typically fit in a resistance if you really wanted to. No other real like pieces of gear would ever choose to only pick resistance over a damage reduction, armor, or maximum life. But at least on your boots, you could probably fit in a specific resistance. Maybe that's good enough. Maybe we'll have to pay a bit more attention to the resistances that roll on our rings as well, because right now you basically don't have to worry about that in any way, shape, or form. My main hope is that we're literally just going to get more bang for our buck, like from the Paragon system and any skill tree decisions that you have that might give you resistances, and not necessarily now have to sacrifice other skills or other stats to make room for the resistances, which is a potential outcome from this. And then they gave us a vague concept of overhauling how vulnerable, overpower, critical damage works in general. They just said vulnerable, overpower, and critical strike damage are going to have changed functionality. This could go a lot of ways. Now, if it's just vulnerable is weaker or is more conditional, that kind of just takes strength away from the characters without really giving them anything. If critical strike damage is just reduced in how many overlapping systems for critical strike damage, this also just takes something away. And they could do anything to overpower and it would literally be better. So if you go like the cosmic scale of what could come out of this, if overpower could function at all, it basically means all that research I did might go completely down the drain. But at least it means that eventually Overpower will be a fully functional system. I think realistically what they would probably seek to do here, because they talked about the fact that they don't want to just take something away without giving us something back, is make it so that these systems are more of a choice as opposed to something that you just take 100% of the time. And when you make that choice, you are rewarded more for making that choice. So let's say vulnerable stops just being the monster takes this much additional damage, but instead says the monster is going to take more damage, but also more abilities will trigger off of it. So unlike like a lucky hit ability, which is if monster is vulnerable, do X. We saw that in Exposed Flesh, the aspect that says if the monster is vulnerable, you have a chance to restore primary essence. I could see them going that way. We're like putting a lot more power onto if vulnerable, do this, as opposed to vulnerable, just do more damage. Critical strike damage similarly could add on like stacking debuffs, which means if you were to critically strike to the target, while you may do less critical strike damage, all damage that you do against them is increased in some way. And then literally Overpower just needs to say it actually works and it scales off of everything. But again, there's a lot of different ways that this could be implemented. I know that they want to foundationally change how these stats work with the character screen, and that it's a choice to do one or the other, as opposed to just taking as many of them as physically possible. So hopefully this allows for more engaging theory crafting and more relevant gear decision choices, as opposed to just biggest number means monsters go boom the biggest. And then for the just stash in general in gems. So they already said that gems were going to move out of the inventory and we're going to move into our crafting materials. Interesting to see how we're going to interact with that menu, because there's no real way to like click that menu. And then what happens once I make a gem and then unsocket it from an item? Does it just go back into that menu? Just interesting to see how that works in general. But the biggest thing here, the thing that I think is the most important, is the stash can be searched and filtered. So what does searched and filtered mean? Filtered probably means you can say put uniques in this tab, put legendaries in this tab, put rare into this tab. On controller right now, I can click a button that at least generally sorts items by item type and then roughly item power. And then after that, it's kind of hit or miss. You might be able to just filter by all of my things that are weapons or all of my things that are armor. This falls a little bit into what does search mean. The search functionality in the game right now allows you, like in a skill tree, to say, show me everything that says Overpower, and then every skill that says Overpower will be highlighted in some way. Are we able to go, show me every piece of gear that has critical strike damage? And or vulnerable damage, and or like, I hope that the search functionality is both easy, like it's a one click, you can just see it, but I also hope that they have some type of like further filtering or like Excel type logic where you can go, show me weapons that are also core damage and crit damage, and now I can just see that. That would be phenomenal for me. Bare minimum, I need to be able to search for aspects and at least one stat on a piece of gear. I would take that bare minimum, but hopefully it's a bit more robust than that. We'll be able to get a bit more logic into it for people who want to be able to like specifically filter. And that in general is the end of what we have, or at least what we can intuit or try to like leech out of the information that they've given us. There are a few things in here that aren't necessarily talked about. There's nothing specifically related to like balancing of the game or changes to characters. I assume there's going to be a big balance patch because one, obviously a lot of things have changed in season 1. Eternal is going to have to change as well, because all of the things that you get in a new season that are seasonal don't touch on it, but they are going to have impact on characters. So when they're balancing the game, they always have to keep Eternal in their forefront of their mind. On top of that, if we're going to be touching systems like Vulnerable, Overpower, and Critical Strike, as well as Elemental Resistances, I would wish to find out more information on how gear affixes are going to change. If one of the biggest problems I have right now in the game is not only just your ability to like enchant and get specific rolls on your gear, now that they fixed the logic that was causing priority stats to happen. It basically means re-rolling gear is like a complete crapshoot. So we don't have anything here about possibly changing any of the crafting systems, which I would really like to see get a bit of an overhaul. Skill trees in general, and the fact that we are still kind of relying on 4 primary skills across the majority of classes and the majority of builds, something to diversify that a little bit further. We don't have any information there. I'm not saying that it's telling that it's not included. Obviously, this is a hype piece to go along with Gamescom, just trying to get like high level bulleted, like, we know you guys were talking about Renown, so here you go. We know you're talking about Endgame, so here you go. We know you're talking about stash space, so here you go. Obviously, we're going to get a lot more specifics before it comes out, but I would like to get that information like moving forward at a faster clip, just so we know what to expect in the season. But let me know what you think down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Obviously, this is like just the tip of the iceberg. This is just to wet our whistle. This is just to get like more traction in the game going. Rod Ferguson said, it's a great time to hop into season 1, join the Diablo family, etc. So, a bit of this is just for advertisement, of course, but it is cool. The cinematic is absolutely beautiful. I recommend watching it. I really like this art style that they've been going with right here. This still image. I forget exactly what the style of art is, but it's just like phenomenal. I love it very much. But I'm interested to see more. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hope that sheds some additional light or gave you a little bit more to chew on based off the information that we got. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.